Good afternoon. Welcome to the presentation, Brahms and Schubert, Taking the Lead at the Library of Congress. My name is Janet McKinney, and I'm an archivist in the music division. Every October, the library has a Founders Day concert in honor of Elizabeth Sprague Coolidge. She was one of the music division's greatest patrons. It's because of her our auditorium was built. It is because of her we have a concert series in the first place. So this year, 2022, our concert featured a number of songs by Brahms, Schubert, as well as Mrs. Coolidge herself. And they were performed by Eric Owens and singers from the Curtis Opera Theater. Today, my colleague, David Plylar, who is a senior music specialist in the concert office, he's going to explore some of the original manuscripts for these songs, giving all of us an up-close view into these fascinating works. And as we go along, I will be sharing related links to our digital collections as David is speaking. But at the end, he'll also demonstrate how you can go about finding these manuscripts and other digitized materials yourself at home, anytime you please.
Thank you so much, Janet. And hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm excited to talk to you about some of these leader manuscripts and just art song manuscripts in general at the Library of Congress. And I had to be, as I was doing this and putting this together, I realized that there's just way too much material to really cover a lot. So I had to be a little bit selective. So if I didn't pick your favorite song, I apologize, but we'll try to make up for it by giving you access to the tools to access them at your leisure. This talk and webinar was kind of inspired by this wonderful program that we had on Founders Day, as Janet mentioned, with Curtis on tour with the artists that you see there. And the program is available online as well. What they did was they presented a number of works by Schubert and Brahms and Mrs. Coolidge. And so I've chosen a few of those as kind of bedrock pieces for us to just take a look at and briefly, and I'll give you some little bits of information about each kind of electronic object that I show you, but it's not going to be a very full, accounting of each work as much as I would like it to be. But I'm also going to depart from what was done in that program as well to show you some other things that kind of fit in with the idea of art song in general at the Library of Congress. Right. So we'll start with Schubert's art song holdings at the Library of Congress. We have a lot of them. Here's a list that I just added a few extra ones with recent acquisitions from the end of the fiscal year 22. You can see in the bottom right there, we have approximately 25, 26 solo songs. And I'll be talking about a few of those things that are not solo songs as well in just a few minutes. But you can see by this list that it's a wide range of them. Some of them you may not know. Some of them you may know very well. But all of these, with the exception of the newest ones, should be available online to view and take a look at. For Brahms, we have also a lot of art song holdings. In fact, we have about 39 solo songs, and they are listed out here. They're here organized by opus numbers, so you can just get a sense of the range from the earliest songs of the opus 3 to quite late works in opus 85. And we also have about 14 songs in this Volkslieder collection of things that were not published. And I haven't gone through those carefully, but there are 14 extra songs. So I guess you could say we have around 53 if you count those, but those are pretty short and tiny compared to the other works that have an opus number. In addition to what the library has in terms of original holograph manuscripts in the hand of the composer, we also have a lot of holdings that are related to those things. Like, for instance, Here's Franz Liszt's transcription of Gretchen am Spinnrad, famous Schubert song from one of his earliest songs. And we have a number of kind of arrangements, and there's a wonderful newly digitized collection called the A.P. Schmidt collection that has a lot of arrangements in it as well, from American composers. That collection is also famous for having a lot of beach materials, Amy Beach materials. But in any case, we have a lot of things that support the art song realm with transcriptions and other types of arrangements, orchestrations, things like that. We also find in the collections a number of interesting elements that are digitized. And of course, there are more things that you can find here, especially if there are things that are not in the public domain, and so therefore not available to be digitized, or just simply haven't been digitized. There's such a high volume of materials that we can't digitize everything that we would like to, or at least at the speed we would like to, even though the people working on it are doing a great job and doing it absolutely as fast as they can. But we find these wonderful little tidbits here. It says, the original autographed manuscript words and music of his famous song Frühlingslied, which is it's Frühlingslied, which is the song, spring song. And it's anyway, it gives a sense of what it says it would have cost $2,000, but since the Great War happened, it's gone down in price to $1,250. And so presumably that may have been the price that the library paid for acquiring this work at this time. And it actually has, it's a collection of 4 somewhat fragmentary songs from that you see right here. So anyway, there's all these interesting things that can be found alongside the manuscripts themselves. So let's put on your lederhosen and don't lose your Gesangfreude, and we'll go through some of these pieces together. We'll start with a piece called Liebesständelei, which was performed on October 29th. And this is like a flirtation type piece, quite early. And what we see here is the piece. This is the piece in its essence here. It's the first version without its stanzas written out. And so it gives a pretty fair accounting of what you actually hear in performance, though. And you can see the titling, crossouts, and kind of things that one might expect to see in this kind of a manuscript. But it's also for Schubert and for other composers, it's pretty legible. And it's a very short song. But what's interesting with Schubert manuscripts in general is that he has a tendency to pack as much as he can onto each sheet of paper that he's working with. And so we'll often find bundles of songs mixed in with the manuscripts. Excuse me. The moment I start to speak, I start to lose my voice a little bit, so I apologize for that. So we, on the back side of this particular song, is kind of an interesting pair of pieces. You have Lützow's Wilde Jagd, his Wild Hunt, and Der Morgenstern, the Morning Star. And these pieces are actually for 2 horns or 2 voices. So I'm just imagining that you have like you go out on a hike and you have your horns and somebody drops one, so you decide to sing instead of doing the double horn awesomeness. But it's kind of an interesting thing that he would do this, and you have tightly packed staves. So you have groups of 2, 2, and 2 going across there. It's not 6 voices; those are just 2, 2, and 2. And the same with the bottom one; those are 2 separate songs, and they have their own Deutsch catalog numbers, the 205 and 203. Strangely, 204 is not present here. I'm not sure. I didn't look that up offhand, but 206 is the other one that was on the back side. So this is kind of, I think, a good representation of the type of manuscript that you'll find a lot with short Schubert works, is this notion of having utilizing the paper as much as possible. And a lot of composers did that, especially ones who didn't have a ton of money for wasting paper. The next one I'm going to show you was not on the program, but it's one of our most famous works, I would say, that we have as part of the collection. It's Die Forelle, the Trout. And this version, says 1821 here. That's true. It's the 5th version of the piece. And so Schubert originally wrote it, I think, in 1817. And this is the 5th and final version of the work. That was also the part of the chamber work, the Trout Quintet, the music based on that music. And you can see that again, it's a very clean copy. It looks a little bit messy, but it's really just trying to fit in everything with this is not something where he's trying to work out any details. I mean, he's already written this piece down 4 other times, so he's probably getting tired of it, but it makes it for a nice presentation copy in the final version. And on the final, on the backside, you can see the beautiful fermatas and the fine there. So it's a nice clean manuscript, which is a good example of that. And so here you have a composer who's still being economical with the use of the paper, but doesn't have to, draw in the margins and things like that just to, stay afloat here. Before we started, I had this piece playing, Einsamkeit, which is kind of a massive work. This is a piece that was composed by Schubert, and he told a friend that he felt like a god after writing this piece. It's about 20 minutes long. It's a pretty massive undertaking. Some would say it's related to or inspired by An die ferne Geliebte of Beethoven. It's kind of a proto-song cycle in a sense, in that it's a large 6-part structure. In any case, it's an amazing piece that is not done much, mostly because of its scale, which is a real shame. But one of the things that I wanted to point out with this particular manuscript is the way that that Schubert, his handwriting changes as the character of the music changes. Now, this is a speculative sort of thing, and I would say that there are several things at play here. There's the drama of writing, and there's the fatigue of writing, and those are 2 very important things that come into play with anybody who writes music by hand. Is that you, especially as you start to write faster music, it starts to become messier, or perhaps having a little bit more of an energy in the music that you're writing. So the beginning of the piece is extremely placid and still. You have these chords that are just kind of coming out of nowhere, and you can see this is just really straightforward writing. You see the typical placement of the whole notes in the center instead of the far left, and so that is something that takes a little bit of getting used to as you go through this manuscript. But then as you keep going in the manuscript, you start to see kind of a bit of agitation coming through in the marks. And you'll also see, I'll show you more specific ones in a few minutes, but you start to see shorthand cuts, like just the repeat marks, like to say, okay, you're going to be doing this kind of vamp that you're doing here. You're going to keep doing that for the rest of the measure, or you're going to repeat this entire measure, and that's what the instruction is, and that way I don't have to write it, because again, it takes effort to write these things down. But they start to have it starts to get more and more agitated, and then we get to that was page 3 of the manuscript. Then we get to page 5, and you start to see how occasionally space considerations come into play. And this is always a funny thing to note, that every composer that I've seen, maybe with a couple of exceptions, and I think that these people, those exceptions are just hiding the manuscripts that show it. Everybody has these moments where they've miscalculated how much room they need. And so everybody I know, living or not living, tends to have this thing where they'll extend a measure off into the margin just to kind of squeeze in that last triplet, as we see here, or something like that. And it comes up all the time. And you just, as you're looking at these manuscripts, you get this tangible feeling of I know what this composer was thinking as he or she got to this point, and that's that I'm out of room and I've got to, accommodate that in some way. And they probably are a little bit ticked about it. But in any case, you start to see that this is where I think that the fatigue starts to come in, and you start to see more and more shorthand as the piece continues. This is still Einsamkeit. This is page 15 of the manuscript. It's definitely our largest Schubert song manuscript that we have. And you also see something interesting that's if you look at the top, after you see all those are indicators of repetition at the top first two measures, you start to see slanted writing of the held whole notes. And this is to help understand which notes they are, because as it gets more and more difficult to write, and be really clear as you're writing quickly, this is a way to guarantee that you're not going to screw up a copyist or something like that, if you're or just have some type of lack of clarity in your writing. So the next piece I'm going to show you is another one that was not on our program, but it's one of two Sehnsucht settings that we have, not by the same poet in this case, or not the most famous one that you're probably thinking of, but this one is the Die Sehnsucht by Schiller, and it is a relatively late one, and it's the second version of this. And the reason I wanted to show you this particular song is that it has another good example of accommodations that composers make in order to just get the job done. And this is something that is shared across other people as well. So for instance, this is a close-up of the second page. What we have here in this detail is the interpolation of two measures. And what I love about this is that you have, it like has the ton of notes at the bottom, and then it has like a little, chalice kind of shape that goes up and to show the two measures of rest for the voice. And these things to me are always charming in some way, just because they show that it's either, I think scholars who study these and look at different versions of it might make an assessment as to whether this is a sin of revision or a sin of omission. Not that it's a sin, but and usually when it's something that is this clear of a fair copy, it's probably just having forgotten, started to do the key change, realized it, got frustrated, but then just started to draw in the extra measures that were meant to be copied there in the first place, as opposed to adding those as a new musical idea that might come up in that place. I'm speculating right now. I'm just saying that is something that people might have opinions about and scholars might want to talk about. So those types of things that they find, they provide different bits of information. I'm going to take a brief step back from Brahms and Schubert. I've only been talking about Schubert so far, but to talk about another kind of important person who was featured on this concert, our Founders Day concert, and that is our founder, Elizabeth Sprague Coolidge, as Janet already spoke about. And she has this work based on Elizabeth Browning's Sonnets from the Portuguese. And I'm just calling it a Browning cycle. I don't really have a legit title for it. But she wrote this piece in 1901, and later at some point made a version of it for voice and string quartet that was performed. The Coolidge and different parts of the song seem to have been performed every once in a while, but it's not really clear that the whole original song cycle has been performed. It's certainly not recorded in the way that it deserves to be. But I thought I'd show you just a couple of things that are interesting about it without let's see. So what we did with this concert was basically make a version of this that would hang together with just one of 10 songs being featured. And one of the ways that we did this was by having the introduction, which I have on the screen at the moment, which is just a solo piano introduction, kind of lay out the motivic material for the entire song cycle. And that song cycle has it's really tightly put together based on these materials that you see here. And it goes in lots of different ways, lots of different keys that you would not expect to see. And what we did was we made a version that would align with the ninth song, which was this page is a part of it. But the reason I focused on this particular page is that towards the bottom, you can see that the exact same thing that Schubert did in that last example from I think from Die Sehnsucht, she is making an hourglass shape accommodation for the missing measure that was not put in there. Now, this is a case where it may have been an addition. It may have been something that was a revision of a new way of putting this together. This manuscript does not have a final version of it. So there's a number of markings in here that really kind of one has to interpret them in making a performing edition. And the types of interpretations that one has to make is, if there's a tremolando marking, do you just roll that in the bass or something, or do you have all the different members of a chord kind of alternate back and forth? There's different ways that one can do it, and you try to do it sensitively based on the time of the piece when it was written, and what you think fits in with the kind of the ethos of the piece. And so when we don't have the composer there to talk back to us, it's a little bit unfair, because they're a little bit kind of out in the open here without much cover, and so you want to provide that cover by being generous in one's response to what you see, especially in a work like this. Another thing that comes up through study of these older manuscripts, that especially ones that are maybe not published, is that this might be the only way that you can determine how a composer, in this case Elizabeth Sprague Coolidge, was thinking about how to put together the song cycle. And they made the composer makes choices about a setting, like how are they going to set the music from word for word, beginning to end? Are they going to combine it with other things? How are they going to handle it? My colleague Laura Yust in the cataloging division put together this table on the bottom left corner that you can see here, that shows which of the sonnets were used in portion of the different with the different songs in this 10 song cycle. And you can see that it's quite varied. It so happens that the ninth sonnet doesn't start at the beginning, and but it is based on that 12th sonnet. And then you can see in the top right where it says "Thy soul hath snatched up mine," you can see that what I did there was I italicized words which were not included in the actual song itself. So the sung portions are the ones that are in regular type, and the italicized parts are not. This is kind of a interesting thing. It's a insight into the way that the composer put together their work, and so it's always kind of fun to discover what their relationship is with text through a process like this. Now I'm going to switch over to Brahms, and we'll look at the earliest pieces first. I think this is a kind of a good example of something that we have this collection of Opus 3. We have the full set, but in slightly different. There's slightly different elements to it that I think are interesting to look at. For the first song, we have early Brahms. This is not as like perfectly indicative of it's not the Brahms manuscript that you see or you think you're going to see with some of the later mature works. It's like there's almost like this finding of his of his written voice as he's looking, when we look at these early manuscripts. But it's very clearly him, and it's much more legible than I think a lot of his later manuscripts are. But you can see that this is well, you can see that this is the number 2 of the set. It's by with a text by Hoppen von Fallersleben, and that happens to be the author of several works that I'm going to show you today. And this was a gift from Hermann Lowen in 1981 to the library. So if you have an extra Brahms manuscript hanging around and you'd like to donate it to us, we would love to take it off your hands and preserve it, like we did with Mr. Lowen. The Liebe in Frühling 2, not the most exciting title. This is what it looks like in that collection of manuscripts. You may notice that it's very different from what we just saw. In fact, this is a copyist manuscript, and it's much easier to read for the most part, but it also becomes a bit more generic in that it's just it's a utilitarian type of manuscript. So you can see exactly what needs to be there, so that when you're going to publication, it's going to be nice and clear and easy to follow. So of this set, this is the one copyist manuscript in this Opus 3 set that we have. But these are also still very interesting for us. And in fact, we have a lot of early music and other things that are just copyist manuscripts because we may not have the original author's manuscript anymore. But oftentimes, these will be ways in which important information is given down the line, especially if a work does not have a publication history during the lifetime of the composer. One of the things that you'll also see is that composers giving, holograph annotations on a copyist manuscript or a printed manuscript, as we will see with a major Brahms work shortly. Another one of our very famous Brahms works is the song Von Ewiger Liebe. And you can see the famous opening here that you would recognize if you're not reading music, no problem, but just check out the song. It's definitely one that is a powerful one. There are some interesting things about this that I think are worth noting. Composers tend to find ways to make their life easier at some point, and at least they often try to do that. And one of those is with finding a method of notation that conveys what needs to be conveyed with the least amount of effort on the composer's part. And so we have this in the red box section that you see up here. There's a triplet pattern that's established in the first measure of that box, and then there's this wonderful dotted half triplet marking that is an indication that you're going to continue that pattern from what you saw in the previous measure. And I just think that this is I don't know that this is something that this is just something that Brahms just decided to do because it made sense and it saved time. And so you'll see that kind of in different places when appropriate. That's always neat to see what people do. Then we have the case, Brahms is always funny when he knows he's running out of room and he doesn't really want to waste a full page on like a couple measures or something like that. He starts to expand out from the sides of the written one. So he has must have had like a little ink rostrum or something that was expand them out, and trying to time it so that it would hit the repeated measures there, so they wouldn't take up much room in the margins. But he'd still be able to finish on that one page. So I always get a kick out of this. But what's interesting is that these types of details belie the power of this music that's here, which is this is this amazing transformation of the music that starts at that top of that page with the key change. But at the same time, it's this however powerful it is, in our mind's ear, it also has this sort of you have this sort of visual gut instinct when looking at it, and it can be it could be a fun thing to look at. So we're going to switch away from from art song and go into vocal quartet with piano duet accompaniment, because that was one of the main features of our October 29th concert. So Brahms wrote the Liebeslieder waltzes, and basically love song waltzes. His opus 52 in 1868 and 9. And then he had the Neue Liebeslieder waltzes, opus 65, and those were kind of composed not right away, but kind of on the heels of the Liebeslieder waltzes. And these were pieces that have relationships to each other. There definitely are cyclical elements that could be found between the pieces. Then after he finished that in 1877, he made a version that was for piano four hands alone without the vocal components. And the reason that I'm bringing that up is that this is a case where the Library of Congress has in its Moldenauer archive the original publication of the Neue Liebeslieder waltzes that Brahms used to edit and create the version for four hands alone. And so I'm gonna walk you through a few of these elements here in this particular song, more so than in the other ones, just so you can see the variety of ways that a composer interacts with his own work, and also how we can learn from this process. So this is the first page of our document that we have at the library, and you can see that he's writing out somebody is writing out the text above and below, and these are things that are going to be set into the new version. And you'll find out that if you look at the actual published version of the four-hand version, you will see that it does include these inscriptions of text, which is kind of interesting. But he also identifies it as the poetry out of Georg Friedrich Daumer's Polydora, and he crosses out the vocal lines, and there's no major changes on this page to the music. So basically, in the four-hand version, you're going to hear what you see on this page. When we move to the second page, you start to see that Brahms is basically continuing to go along the same route. It's just saying, okay, one assumes that nobody's going to be singing, so he doesn't need to cross them out again. You're just going to be hearing those piano parts. However, there's something he was missing when he gets to the bottom system there, and that is, and you can see this in the blue crayon, he's missing the rhythmic interest of that, in this case going E to an F sharp, and then a G sharp to an A there, and then because he's Brahms, he's thinking, okay, well, I can't just do this and not continue it. He adds the extra element of that A at the on the and of three there at the end of the third to last measure there. So you have little minor changes like that start to come into play. If we go to page 3, it starts to get a bit more serious. Now we are making it simpler in some ways with crossing out the repeated material, which originally had a bass solo followed by the quartet singing together. Now that doesn't matter. You can just repeat the piano part as it is in those first 6 measures or so. And then in the bottom right corner, you start to see paste overs. These are frequently found and are frequently used in different manuscripts. In the case of the Brahms, you can see them here. Oftentimes these are scraps of paper that on the reverse sides may have something of great interest with pieces that are either unidentified by that composer, or scraps of a sketch or something like that from some other work. And so sometimes those are fun to look on the undersides of. You can also find out, in this case, we know it's a published version, so we know what he's covering up. It's no big mystery, but you have cases like in Arnold Schoenberg's Verklärte Nacht, which is also held at the Library of Congress. You have you have sewn coverall. So they're not pasted on, but they're actually sewn on, and you can actually peek underneath it and see different music there. So that's always kind of a fun thing to look at least I think it is. But then we start to see a certain type of shorthand that comes into play, and oftentimes these will vary by composer, but usually a composer will have something like this as a way to convey to the publisher or to a copyist or to whoever he's working with a way to keep track of what's going on. In this case, you have a very simple, in that mid to the left section, you have A, B, and then you have A, B. The A measure is replacing the A measure, and the B measure is replacing the B measure. This is only so useful because you start to, it just depends on the size and position of your margins and which measures you're modifying as to whether or not it will be useful. And then we have more paste overs and see like that. I'm going to speed it up, but one of the things that is also very interesting and what you learn about Brahms as an arranger, I should just say, have a quick aside to say that Brahms made a ton of four-hand arrangements of his instrumental works and his vocal works as well. For instance, the Ein Deutsches Requiem, we have a version of that for four-hand piano that Brahms made, and he did these things with a certain absolute skill, but also certain utility. And so he was not so sentimental about getting rid of some of his melodies. So what we have here is we have this is the fourth song in the group. There's no markings here that indicate that there's really much of a change, except for one excising a pitch here and there or something. There's not much of a change here. So what's the deal? Is he going to include that the bass melody? Well, turns out he does not. So he just says it's not important enough to transcribe, or it's not so much that it's not important enough, it's that the logistics of making it have the presence that he wants it to have would be anathema to the nature of the music that he's writing. So a transcriber might naturally think, okay, well, maybe the way to do this is to bring that melody up to a different octave and have it in a different register. And this would be a way to manage this. So maybe that left hand part is still doing exactly what's there in the primo part. But then, the right hand is doing that. But Brahms may have just, and clearly he did, just think that he didn't want to do that. And he just thought it was perfectly adequate just to have the piano part there. So that's kind of an interesting thing that he'll do. And what I found just in a very quick study of this particular manuscript is that he tends to make these decisions based on proximity within a certain number of steps to that melodic line that would be there. So if there's going to be any type of crunchy crossover within about a third or second or something like that, where there's going to be intersections that would make it unclear what you're supposed to be listening to or what you're supposed to be playing, in those cases he tends to get rid of one of the parts that's there, and usually that's a vocal line that gets excised. There are cases though when he's not really, it doesn't need to really change anything because the piano part is already covering the vocal line, but he does make certain amendments. And look at the blue crown at the bottom of this page, and you'll see that he's making certain changes that include pitches in the vocal line that would not have been present in the piano part alone. So it's not like he's just ignoring it. It's just he's making calculated decisions, and also decisions that are intended to make it a playable work. It's always kind of funny to look at. The Library of Congress has some interesting manuscripts related to four-hand waltzes, and that the Opus 39 four-hand waltz version of his waltzes, library has the solo piano version and also the simplified solo piano version. And it's the same with Liszt. I think sometimes the simplified versions are, it's fun. It's like you might as well just play the hard version. It's simplified to a degree, but maybe the gains are not quite as there. But in this case, it's certainly easier to keep it as it is. Sometimes the edits are minor, not meaning in terms of modality, but in terms of degree. In this case, I've marked with a blue box some changes in hairpins. And what those hairpins are showing is some type of accommodation, some type of reaction to the fact that he can't get the vocal effect that's in this this breathy, slurred together, but rests in between notes in the vocal quartet. He can't emulate that on the piano, so he does certain things to try to create some way of referencing a special effect. And even though it's just basic hairpins, it's still something. And I think that it may be him responding to those types of concerns. You also come across some kind of funny things that happen when you're correcting, is that if you're correcting, you may make it harder to tell what's actually going on. So we have in the red box on the left, we have a smudge. And then on the right, he does the A and A kind of correlation thing again to show exactly what notes he meant to write there. And it's just got crossed out. So if you look at the printed version, it'll have a C and an A there. So he takes care of those things like that. Then he will also do things like that will adapt kind of the nature of the piece itself. And that is, in this case, he's changing the flow of the eighth notes up in the upper register to maintain a distance from the melody, which is now a prominent part of the left hand of the primo piano part that you see there. So you can see the half notes and things like that spell out the melody that you would hear in the voices. So here's a case where Brahms wants that melody to be clear, but he doesn't want and he still wants the accompanimental effect of the descending arpeggios in the top, but he does not want that to interfere with the register or the or just the shape of the melody underneath it. And so he'll make accommodations like that, and they're usually just, it makes absolute sense why he would do that. And it's also a good reminder that composers could have written these things in any of a number of different ways, and this is the way that he chose to do it. In this one, we get to the 15th and final section of the Neue Liebeslieder waltzes. And this is not based on the Daumer. It's now based on a Goethe text. And he calls this Zum Schluss. This is kind of the conclusion, or at the end of the at the end. And so there's kind of this process that I think we can map out of what's going on in Brahms' head. At least I like to imagine that is. He probably, if you were here today, probably, I don't know, punch me or something for saying some of these things. But in any case, I can imagine him roughly saying this type of thing. So he's like, okay, I'm going to do this paste over here. And you can tell that he later thought twice about that because he X'd it out over the paste over. And then it gets to the next page. It's like, okay, I can write in, I've got enough room in that primo part to write in what I need that piano part to be. So he starts writing it in, and then he gets to the next page and just crosses it out, and now he's out of room. He doesn't know, how are you going to manage this sort of a thing? So suddenly you go from having these clear edits to not having any edits at all anymore. And so what he actually did was he just decided, to hell with it, I'm going to just rewrite it. So at the end of this, manuscript, we actually have a holograph manuscript of Brahms with the Zum Schluss setting, with that's, I guess easier to read. Like if he assumes that you know how it goes because it's already been published. It doesn't have to be so legible that he has to take too much time with it, but he writes it out so it's clear what he expects each part to do. And what's interesting is that some of the stuff that he wanted to do was to show octave repetitions of the same material, and so you have both hands doing the same thing, and so you'll still have those short hands that come there, but you largely have this. This is a kind of it's a Passacaglia form movement that ends up being this really interesting instrumental coda to it, and it's a very different. It's especially without the voices, it kind of has a sort of different feel to it. Especially, it's also got a different meter as well than the waltzes that came before, but it still is kind of in that world and feels like this, almost like a benediction of sorts that you get. So it's kind of a fascinating way to conclude this particular manuscript. And it's I always enjoy these manuscripts that aren't so much fair copies as they are showing some type of process that the creator is doing, going through, kind of interacting with an object, maybe that they've created or maybe that somebody else has created, and kind of showing us some of that process, or at least giving us an insight into what that process may have been. I never want to assume that anything I'm saying is what happened, because it may be completely off the mark, but you do get this sense of there is a deliberative process that's going on. So that's the close that's the Zoomschluss, and that leads us to our Zoomschluss. So thank you all for listening, and I think what I'll do now is should I show what would be best, Janet? I could show the a couple of quick ways to search for these things first.
Yes, please. Yes, that'd be great.
Okay, so let me stop sharing.
While you're getting set up, David, I will answer one question.
Sure.
Someone asked where this recording would be available after today, and I will also put that link in the chat. It will be on the Library of Congress website. It's under the collection of event videos. It will not be there tomorrow. It might be sometime, because they review it and edit it and make it look beautiful before they put it online. But I will put that link in the chat as well.
Thank you, Janet. Yeah, there's they need to take out scrub the inaccuracies from what I've been saying. So that can take quite a bit of time, but once it gets up there, it should be available, because there should be no problems in this case. So some of the things that let me just try to get to my, it's a little bit hard to get to the tabs. Sorry about that. One of the best ways to look for digital materials at the library, just if I'm thinking, okay, I haven't really messed around with the Library of Congress at all, so what am I going to do as a new user? Well, you can start looking through catalog records, and we can take a quick look at that, but you could just go to loc.gov, which is the library's website, and you can type in under, it says everything. You can type in, like what I'm doing right now, just saying Brahms, and I don't know, let's say Liebeslieder. And then I hit enter, and a few things came up. But one of the things that's kind of cool is that you can go to the left and you can look for, if you're looking for the manuscript itself, and you think you know that there is a manuscript, you can just go to notated music, and then it will, this list is already pretty short, but it will shorten that list to one thing, and that is the Neue Liebeslieder waltzes here. And then you can just click on that, and there you are. You can look at all 40 images, and you can download them as a PDF. You can download each one as a JPEG, whatever you'd like. You could also do a broader look, a broader search. You could say Schubert, and just say Schubert, and see what happens. It might take a second here, but the idea then, you can go again. You know, you want to deal with notated music. Well, there's 253 things that are Schubert, but it might give you a sense of what's there also, because we've scanned a lot of printed music, and often first editions, and you can find some interesting things that are available to look at on the site as well. And you'll also find arrangements. If you keep scrolling, you can change the number of items that you have on the list, and and make it a more detailed search if you want. But that's one way to do it. That's a good way to do it if you're looking for specifically for materials that are digitally available. There's a different process for looking for things that might be at the library that you could consult in person. And I don't know if I should go into that too much detail, but I can at least say, let's see, I think I have it. Yeah. Okay, well, there's several ways to do this. You can go to, you can search specific finding aids, which is just findingaids.loc.gov. And you have, you might not know which one it is, but you can say Moldenauer, which is, I'm just picking the one that had the Brahms in, and it comes up with the Moldenauer archives at the Library of Congress. And you can go in here and you can search for, I love Brahms, but I also love Boulez. So let's look for Boulez and see what it comes up. And wow, there's a whole bunch of different things, but the issue here is that we don't have them digitized. So in the case of the Boulez, that's not available to take a look at, but you can find everything from correspondence to manuscript holdings and things like that. One last thing I'll say, and then I'll, if there's any questions or chat things, I would just say that you can also go to loc.gov/catalog. And here you can go to the advanced search. But the idea was that you could go to the catalog search and you can use certain parameters to be able to find certain types of categories. So one of those parameters I was going to use was ML96 as a kind of a manuscript. That's the kind of, those I was about to say inside baseball kind of a thing. And there's also your ML29, 30, and 31 that will give you access to a number of our major collections that feature Brahms and Schubert. For instance, the Whitall collection and some of the other kind of special collections that hold these types of materials. So you can always look there and see what we have. We're doing our best to digitize it, but it just takes time and there's a lot of stuff. So if you're in town and can come in and check it out in person, that's a good way to do it too.
Someone was wondering, and I think they were referring to the Schubert. They didn't specify what manuscript they were talking about, but they were wondering why he only wrote the treble clef. What about the bass clef? And I think this was referring to the Schubert with the multiple manuscripts on the back and front pages.
Sure. Well, I'm not sure just offhand exactly which one, but I think I understand what Janet's saying. I think it was more that it's very quickly done, and usually there's usually an assumption of an F clef, and then an assumption of a G clef, and then earlier than that, there's an assumption of like a C clef, say like Haydn or something. That would be what you would find at the top, and so sometimes it was very hastily produced, not to create confusion, but just because at the time Schubert's not thinking, well, I wonder what somebody 200 years from now is gonna be able to interpret this. He's just thinking, okay, this tells me what I need to know, and since I know it's a bass clef, but maybe I don't need to write it. And so a lot of times you'll also see composers doing the same thing with their key, any type of key that they have written. So they'll indicate it once, but then it will cease to be. It looks like it's in C major or something like that, but it's not actually. It's it's D flat or something like that. So, but they don't repeat it because they know what's supposed to be there. So that happens from time to time.
And there was a question that says, do scholars often consider these manuscripts, or are some waiting to be seriously examined?
That's a really good question, and I don't know all the answers for each one of these, but I would say with a number of these pieces are extremely famous. So I don't know that there's going to be a ton of new Schubert scholarship that comes out of looking at Di Fiorella in our version now at this point, because a lot has been said about that over the years. But there's so much material that has not been digitized, and even some that has been digitized that I would say is ripe for scholarly attention. And so it's always a good thing. If, first of all, you should read about it, any piece that you're interested in, and find out what has been said about it for sure. And I think you'll find that more often than not as much has been said about it as you would think. There are exceptions, of course, things like these major works that, but I don't know that, Einsamkeit, for instance, this gigantic work has gotten the kind of attention that Die Schöne Müllerin or Winterreise or these kind of larger works from slightly later in Schubert's career. It certainly hasn't been studied and brought to light as much as those pieces. So I think there's always space to learn something new with anything, and people come at them I think that people come at them with different perspectives, and those can be refreshed. There's never like an end, like, okay, now we've learned everything we need to know about manuscript X. But there could be people who have a different perspective, and they may have something new to add to it. And so we always welcome anybody to come and really explore these things.
Maybe one last question, because it's almost 2:00. What was the process for getting the Mrs. Coolidge piece performed? Because you said it wasn't recorded, but is it published? If not, was the original manuscript used, or was it transcribed into a digital notation score? How did you all go about that process?
Right. So in this case, it's not published. And so what we did was I went through and actually put it into Finale so that it was legible. And I had to make certain editorial decisions, but I marked each one of those wherever I made them so that the performer would know that was, this guy's fault if there's a problem. It's not Mrs. Coolidge's. And so that was kind of this process that we went through. And also we had to find, when we have these manuscripts that haven't been performed or don't have much reach, it's also difficult to get people to play them because they have no reference for it really. And so you have to kind of give it its best foot forward. And we were very pleased with Curtis and the artists who came in to sing, that they were willing to go out on a limb and perform this piece. And I thought it was lovely. It went over well. And so it was definitely worth doing for sure.
Thank you, David, for those fascinating insights into our collections. It's always a joy to look at original manuscripts and manuscripts in the creative process. And thank you, everyone, for attending the webinar on Brahms and Schubert taking the lead at the Library of Congress. We look forward to seeing you at the library very soon. Have a great day.